Hello everybody and welcome to part 2 of the Gippsland Smart Futures series. Today's webinar topic is local community energy hubs and I will be your host for today. My name is Heidi Hamm. I work for Sustainability Victoria as the Gippsland Strategic Coordinator. I work in the Regions, Communities and Local Government team, and one of the programs we support is the Community Power Hub Pilot Program. So I've been working closely with the Latrobe Valley Community Power Hub over the last 2.5 years or so, as well as being in touch with several other organisations and community groups across the region who are supporting community energy projects. So I'm really glad to be your host today for the second in a series of 6 webinars about some of the exciting work that is going on in the renewable energy space across Gippsland. So this series has been organised and supported by several groups, and I'd like to thank them for their support. So DELP, the Latrobe Valley Authority, the Gippsland Climate Change Network, the Latrobe Valley Community Power Hub and Wellington Shire Council. The first webinar in the series was on the 6th of May and focused on large-scale renewable energy projects. So today we will be talking about renewable energy on a community scale, and we'll hear from 3 great speakers. So we'll hear from Chris Barfoot about some of the activity of the Latrobe Valley Community Power Hub, from Peter McKernan regarding the renewable off-grid setup at the Lacola Wilderness Village, and from John Coulter about the Energy Innovation Cooperative's Old Energy New Energy project at the Wonthaggi State Coal Mine. So before we dive in, just a little bit of housekeeping. So this is a webinar, so we can't hear you, but we encourage you to please ask questions as we go along using the Q&A box down the bottom of your screen. So you'll also see that there's a chat box, but please only use the chat box if you've got any technical issues. So questions in the Q&A box and technical issues in the chat box. We'll have a chance to raise some of these questions after each of the speakers, and then a little bit more time at the end where we'll bring all 3 presenters back on. We won't be addressing the raised hands button, so no need to press that. So as I said, please type your questions into the Q&A box. So we have Esther and Darren in the background who are managing the technical aspects of the webinar today from the Wedge Entertainment Centre in Sale. And they are recording the webinar today, which will be made available on the Gippsland Smart Futures website, as well as a Q&A doc, which will have the answers to the questions that have been raised today, as well as any that we don't get to cover. So without further ado, I will introduce our first speaker, Chris Barfoot. So Chris has lived his whole life in the Latrobe Valley and has worked in all aspects of power generation and mining in the valley for 33 years. He holds a Masters of Engineering Science and brings his extensive knowledge of the power industry, project management and business development to the renewable energy sector, which he sees utilising transmission facilities in the valley to support the national grid. I've had the pleasure of working with Chris via the Community Power Hub program, of which he is the project manager for the Latrobe Valley Hub. So we'll now hear from Chris about some of the work he has done through this role. Over to you, Chris.
Okay, and thank you. We're just doing the magic here of trying to make everything work and make sure that we've pushed all the appropriate buttons, unmuted things and trying to get presentations to work. So hopefully this works smoothly from here on in. Okay, so welcome. And thank you for attending. Today we're talking a little bit about the Latrobe Valley Community Power Hub. And as we can understand, it's been a strange project which not many people have really understood. So we're going to try and clarify a lot of that today. Firstly, it was a pilot project. It was run across the 3 communities of Ballarat, Bendigo and Latrobe Valley as a 2-year pilot. The hub host, as in Gippsland Climate Change, worked with Sustainability Victoria to establish the hub. And it was all about increasing local knowledge, understanding and willingness to participate in community energy projects, which of course in the heart of coal country, that can be a challenge. But realistically, our aim is to help you realise your projects. So what is the hub? It's a group of experts brought together to help facilitate community groups to learn to scope, design, finance and implement their project. We are not doing your project. We are here to assist. We are the facilitators. We are the catalyst to make it happen. We are not your doers. And that is one of the very big differences that people often misunderstand with a hub. Now, this encompasses all forms of renewable energy. So we've gone from rooftop solar, off-grid, solar farms. We've looked at hydros. We've looked at numerous various options that go with it. One such one is a community solar pathway, and I will just throw myself open to the technology gods, press stop share, and see if magic happens.
The Yanar Solar Path is a fantastic project. Latrobe City Council is extremely grateful to all of the community members who worked so tirelessly to get this to happen.
And hopefully we're back on track. Now that may seem like a silly little system, a footpath with a collection of solar pathway lights, but that had been a problem for that town for 10 years. They'd been trying all sorts of efforts to get it through, and actually the part of the hub was actually to bring together the technical experts to help select the appropriate equipment, to advise the council on the roadway system, the legalities that were necessary for the installation. And again, this is what we do in terms of facilitation. The actual project was paid for by the Yanar community and by the LVA. The actual project management and the whole tendering process was covered by Latrobe City Council. So again, we the facilitator, not necessarily the doer, but our support was absolutely crucial. Some other examples that we've had, mainly in relation to solar, which is the most common renewable energy we do. Yanar is one where we work with them on passive building design, and then we've connected them to the Energy Innovation Cooperative in terms of getting a loan. And John will cover these in much more detail than I will here. The Locksport Community Hall, we ran a bulk buy system which resulted in a donation being made to the community. Based on a voting system that was run, they happened to win, and I congratulate them on that installation. Community College Gippsland, again, we offered to help with the initial design. They were then successful via grant systems. Interchange Gippsland, in case we did the analysis of their power systems, came up with a solar design and then assisted them with their grant applications. And who knows, hopefully that'll happen in the near future. Traralgon Neighbourhood House is another one which we've connected with the Energy Innovation Co-op to provide a low-cost loan for the installation of the solar. And Rotary Centenary House, again, in this case, we did the solar design on the initial part of it, and then fortunately they were funded by actually a movie crew which were doing the studies doing a film at Hazelwood Power Station. And as part of that, they donated the money necessary for that. Bank Australia is one of our last ones here, which is where we're looking at commercials, and I'll cover that in another slide as we move into it. But what you can see from that is every project is different. There's round pegs in square holes. Hey, we know how to make those fit. There's no two ways about that. We analyse the situation, we develop the best value options, we scope the works, we define the products needed, we help them to find their suppliers and contractors. So when we take things like this, we also then have to provide support in terms of recommending financing and fundraising options. Sometimes it's assistance with project management. Sometimes it's commissioning and assessment of results. The analysis at the end is always critical to know that you did achieve what you were after. And sometimes it's assistance with grant applications. With solar farms is another one that's very common. What we have found is that we've looked at many solar farms as part of this process, and for most community-based solar farms, there are really very few that actually do make it through the system. However, we do have one which is now approaching hopefully a point where it will actually be constructed, and that is the Ramyuk Aboriginal Corporation. And we work with them, again, helping them scope and design the concept of a 5 megawatt solar farm. And this is a wonderful project because it actually will be Indigenous owned, run on Indigenous land for the benefit of the Indigenous community, and particularly in relation to improving their own health, which is an absolute critical thing. So yes, we wish them luck further on in their scheme, but again, our role was about helping with the initial pre-feasibility, helping them set up and get the ideas running. In this case, we actually had a Japanese delegation from Fukushima coming out, looking at and trying to understand how do we interact with the community. And people are sitting up and looking at the hub model, and they are interested in what we are doing. And indeed, the recent report by Helen Haynes actually calls for 50 hubs to be established across Australia. Off-grid systems, well, as we mentioned, Peter is the king of these, and he's the one who has helped us with the whole development of Licola. Just with Licola, it actually just started again. There was the community centre, the Hayfield Community Centre, who was the initiator of the project. The Lions Club delivered the project. They fundraised, they delivered it. And Peter was the one who helped us all get the figures together to work out how to make it work. And he will cover that in much more detail next. And it is a wonderful little video and read that comes with that. Commercial installations, though, are becoming a much more reality for us. In conjunction with the Power Hub, we set out to try and break down some of the barriers that occur for people undertaking commercial installations. In this case, we're talking about utilising a special purpose vehicle. Now, what that is it is a system which allows you to have 20 investors, which can work on a project up to a maximum value of $200,000. The thing is, though, with anything like this, once you get into that, we are talking legals. Now, those legals cost up to $50,000 between the hubs to develop. They will be made available to other community groups, as we said there, at a price tag of $1,000. And that will cover things like roof rental agreements, solar farm lease agreements, power purchase agreements, and all the documents needed for the solar panel validation initiatives and so forth. They are a comprehensive set of documents. They are very important if you are working in the project field. And as you can see, an incredible discount off that. However, I do make the simple point that for anyone who is using a set of legal documents, it is quite likely you will need to modify them slightly to suit every application. Unfortunately, it's usually very rare that one size fits all on those things. But on top of that, we don't just sit here and install solar panels. So we actually do sit in the background, and we have been spent a lot of time working in things which are awareness. We spent a lot of time involving different groups and schools and so forth throughout the systems that we've done, and providing a lot of opportunities for Gippsland in that regard. We work with all the major banks and superannuation funds, aiming to develop better funding models for renewable energy. And that is approaching a point of near completion. We actually are hoping that we will see that come to fruition in the very near future. We're working with the Clean Energy Regulator and the Clean Energy Council to try and make changes to allow us to actually be able to reuse solar panels rather than currently going to scrap at the moment. It's anticipated that by the time we get to, say, 2025 or thereabouts, there will be thousands upon thousands of tons of scrap solar panels, and I don't want to see that. They are still a very valuable resource which we can reuse into our communities. The future, where are we going? Every year we seem to get together and have a farewell party and say goodbye to the hub, because we assume that we'll never get funding again. And we are at that point in time, so we are getting near our farewell party as usual. But the thing is, we don't know. At the moment, we have been working off a grant system with the Victorian budget being deferred to October. We don't know whether we will be granted or not. But one thing we guarantee you is we will be trying whatever we can to continue on in this process. We are committed to continuing to help all of Gippsland, and will continue to seek opportunities to become self-funded and continue the services we have been providing. So thank you, and I hope that was interesting.
Thanks so much for that, Chris. We haven't had any questions come through the Q&A, but I just wanted to ask you something that often comes up with community groups that are wanting to do a community energy project is, where do we start? What advice would you give them?
Every project has to start with the very basic analysis. You have to understand your systems. You have to look at the whole complex part of it. Unfortunately, there is no quick, simple answers on many cases. And so the whole interaction and working with everybody is the most important thing we can do. So consultation to start with, analysis, and then from there you can define your whole project probably much better.
Great, thank you so much, Chris. I'll move into our next speaker now, who is Peter McKernan. Peter has been designing and installing standalone power systems since 1984. He has also worked in professional audio, power rectifiers, television transmission, construction, mining, manufacturing, power generation and solar systems. At Casey Station in Antarctica, he commissioned the synchronization system for 2 500 kilowatt generators. And prior to this, he spent 20 years manufacturing houseboats at Lake Hilton. So, holy moly, a definition of jack of all trades, certainly Peter. We will hear from Peter about the work that he has done at the Lacola Wilderness Village. This is an amazing project, as Chris mentioned. And I'd like to acknowledge here the importance and necessity of partnerships for community energy projects, as Chris also mentioned. So there were many organisations involved in this project. And again, I'd like to acknowledge the Hayfield Community Resource Centre here, whose community trust and local knowledge was integral to get this project off the ground. So over to you, Peter.
Thanks very much, Heidi. After hearing that nice long introduction, it's no wonder I've got grey hair. It's amazing the number of things that you found that I've done. I'm going to try and share screen too, and with a bit of luck, you'll see a presentation about Lacola Village. And you should be seeing it now. So Lacola Village is in the high country, up in north of Traralgon. It was established quite a long time ago by as a sawmilling village, and then it became a Lions recreation camp. And for all of that time, it's run on diesel generation. So this is how we made the village of Lacola totally self-sufficient. The original system just had a pair of generators. In fact, it had 3. They could synchronize automatically, and all of the energy just flowed in one direction, off to the main switchboards, to the houses, the caravan park, the cafe, and the gymnasium. First thing we did was we interrupted that circuit and installed a multi-mode inverter and some batteries. This is what we call a diesel charge system. How this works is the energy can flow through the inverters, but any excess capacity that's inside the generators is put inside the batteries. Once the batteries are full, we turn the generator off, and then we use the energy in the batteries to run the site. So that's a basic system that we've been doing for a long time on a lot of different sites, and that actually saves quite a bit of fuel, merely because when the generators do operate, they're operating at their peak efficiency, and then for a lot of the time you've got them turned off. Next thing you can do to a system like this is you can add what we call AC coupled solar. AC coupled solar looks a lot like the domestic systems that you've seen about. It incorporates the same inverters as you'd see on a domestic installation, and they synchronize with the grid. So either the grid is the actual output from the generators, or it's the output from the multi-mode inverter. Either way, there's a synchronous AC waveform, and the solar system joins in sync with that. Excess energy from the solar energy can be directed directly into the houses and the caravan park, and then the excess energy can be directed and converted to DC and stored in the batteries. To this, we added another solar farm. So on the mountain behind Lacola, we added a 100 kilowatt solar farm. So the energy from that, once again, can go directly towards the loads, and it combines with the energy from the gymnasium roof. Once again, you make more excess energy that gets converted into DC energy and stored in our batteries. Once the batteries are full, the generators are off, and Lycola is finally in silence. This is the first time in 50 years that they've had such a quiet site. We were able to put the second solar farm facing slightly towards the west, and the gymnasium farm faces slightly towards the east. The advantage of this is that as the sun rises, the gymnasium array kicks goals early in the morning, and that allows us to cook our breakfast and top up our batteries quickly. And then on a hot afternoon, if the air conditioning systems are running, we're able to use the western facing array, which is on the mountain, and that continues to produce energy until the sun finally goes down. Monitoring is an important part of what we do, and on this particular installation, we offered multiple modes of monitoring. The management staff can have a graph on their telephones or on their laptop, and they can see how the battery is going, and see how much energy they've made for the day and how much energy they've consumed for the day. We also offered them a fairly simplistic version of the monitoring, because it's Lycola is essentially an educational facility. This gave them the opportunity to explain to children the difference between a healthy battery and an unhealthy battery in a more generic type of way. Then we've got a slightly more sophisticated version of the monitoring. This is the type of monitoring you have when you've got a big solar system at home and you want to stand around at the barbecue and brag about how well your system's going. And then, because they do occasionally have university students and research engineers come up to Lycola, we've also offered them a level of data management and data acquisition that gives them quite a granular look into absolutely everything that's occurring at the site. There's pages and pages more information of data available to them, but suffice to say that it can be used as a teaching level. We gave them some ideas of what the equipment would look like as this first solar farm and the second solar farm. To give you an idea of the amount of the capacity of the system, we've got a 940 kilowatt hour battery. That's the gross capacity of the battery. We normally only use about 242 kilowatt hours out of that battery. That's to preserve the battery. We're hoping to get around about 18 to 20 years out of this battery. The site uses 621 kilowatt hours a day, of which about 190 is used in the evening. The inverters are able to push out 60 kilowatts continuous, and we can have a short-term peak up to 100 kilowatts. We can run the inverters with one of the generators and provide up to 160 kilowatts. And I can synchronize both generators and the inverters, and so that's cogeneration that produces 260 kilowatts. Their average daily solar yield is about 640 kilowatt hours a day, which is a little bit more than their average daily burn. So we're expecting enormous savings from this site. There are some small towns that have been sort of flagged to me as candidates for a similar sort of concept to this. Similar to Lycola, we would have a multi-mode inverter connected to the township, but instead of the generators, we'd have the grid. Once again, most of the energy would flow in one direction. There would be some energy from the solar that would combine with the arrays and directly power some of the loads. We would modulate the rate of charge according to the demands of the grid. So it may be that the grid operator says during 6 p.m. to 9 p.m. we'd prefer you didn't use quite as much energy, so we can actually automatically back off our rate of charge so that we reflect a much lighter load on the grid, and then perhaps later on we can top up our batteries. Another thing that we offer to the grid operator is that we can do power factor correction. This is far more efficient than an uncorrected system, and it actually is a big bonus for the grid operator themselves if we can have sites that can do automatic power factor correction. From time to time, the grid blows over and things don't work. In a situation like that, this small town would operate in island mode. Island mode means it's no connection to the grid whatsoever. So the contactor lifts internally in the multi-mode inverters, and all of the energy either goes into or out of the batteries according to the town's needs. If it happens that the yield is not quite as high as the load, and it becomes apparent that we're going to run out of battery power, we can actually send digital messaging around to various locations, and we might just turn off things like the swimming pool or spa baths or something like that to conserve a little bit of energy until the grid's restored. This type of thing is what I'm most excited about doing, and I've really enjoyed doing it. I'd like to start now by answering questions, but before I do go to the questions, I'm just going to share a video with you, which is of the same site. Share screen one.
Lions Australia have been concerned for some time that a large amount of their revenue goes towards generating their electricity and servicing their generators. In 2018, I got approached to design a system that would overcome the need for generating power 24 hours a day. Lacola Village is set in the high country in Victoria. It's on the banks of the McAllister River, the bottom of the Great Dividing Range. It used to be a sawmill village a long time ago. It went into disuse, and then the Lions purchased it and they use it for recreational camping. The unique thing about Lacola is its position. It's about 50 kilometres from the nearest grid, which would make bringing the grid to it prohibitive. So Lacola's been powered by diesel generation since its inception. Initially, the generators were only used intermittently. As the camp grew, it got to the point where they have to operate a diesel generator 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. It's very noisy, uses a lot of fuel, and it contributes a lot of CO2 emissions. At the moment, they spend about $135,000 a year on diesel generation and maintenance. If we can reduce that, then that money can be turned into running programs, which is the whole point of Lacola. Normally in an installation like this, you'd have lots and lots of small installations with individual generators and individual solar systems. In Lacola, we'll just have one centralised power station and distribute the power to the whole system. The solar system that we're putting in has to power 28 houses, a gymnasium, a swimming pool, a CFA station, a shop, service station and a caravan park. It's a complete town. We're going to put up approximately 600 solar panels. These solar panels will be orientated at different angles so that we can get the best of the rising sun and also the best of the setting sun. Gives us a nice energy spread. This energy will store into some batteries. The batteries will be in 2 large shipping containers that'll weigh about 37 tonnes when it's completed. That stores enough energy to get us through the night so that the following day, when the sun rises, we can start capturing solar energy again and continue on. The batteries that we're using on the project are a German-designed battery called recombinant tubular plate gel battery. They've got extremely long lifetimes, very good efficiency. They're a very heavy battery and possibly not a practical battery for an electric car, but ideally suited for what we're doing here, which is storing large quantities of energy over a long period of time. The inverters that we'll be using for this installation are designed and built in Australia. A lot of people don't realise that Australia leads that technology. We make some of the best inverters in the world. Our total emissions will reduce by 90%. So that means that the diesels will be there for backup during winter, during the grey periods where we get very low light. One of the things that we're hoping to do with this installation is we'll put a monitor in the mess hall and we'll make guests aware of their energy consumption. They'll get to see how much energy the whole camp is using. They'll get to see where the energy is coming from and where it's going to. Awareness of energy consumption actually helps people reduce energy consumption. When the project's completed, we'll generate more than 90% of the camp's energy from solar alone. It'll come as a shock to a lot of people that Lacola is entirely self-sufficient in terms of energy. A lot of people won't even realise this is the system that's generating their energy. When I started in solar, we paid $13 a watt. Solar systems now cost around 46 cents a watt. It's made it so affordable. Things like this have become competitive with coal generation, and in fact are now cheaper than diesel generation. So this makes the whole thing possible. I've been an environmentalist for all of my life, and to have an opportunity to make this much of an impact is quite exciting for me.
Okay, hopefully that went through okay.
Yeah, thanks so much for that, Peter. Esther's just put up a note in the chat that if it was a bit choppy for some people, the video will be made available on the website too, so people will be able to watch that again. But thank you so much. We'll jump into some questions because we've had a few come through here. There was a couple of questions around the cost of the system and also the return on investment.
Okay, we had a budget of about 980,000. We actually bought it in under budget. The payback for the Lions Club is around about 7.6 years by our mathematics. So far, the data that's come in from the site has sort of reinforced our views on that. It's been good.
Okay, great. Thank you. And a few questions on the batteries as well. What type of battery is used for this sort of system? Where are they made?
Yep.
So
they're a German-made battery. They're a sealed lead acid German battery. Their technical name is a recombinant tubular plate gel. I've had 21 years out of a set of those batteries, so they have a very, very good life expectancy. I use those rather than lithium for jobs like this because with a lithium battery, the strong selling point is that you can use 80% of the available charge, whereas with lead acid, we tend to only use about 33% at the most. But the big advantage with lead acid at that point is that if something goes wrong when it gets down to 66% state of charge, you can set off an alarm to say that the generator's run out of fuel or whatever the problem is, and you've still got some reserve, which is enough usually to get the client to get the fuel back into the genset, get it back on auto again and solve the problem. With lithium, you'd be turned off.
great. And there was also a question about one of your earlier slides and not catching the significance of the battery condition. Can you explain that a little bit more?
Was that the sort of cartoon one?
Yeah.
Okay, so one of the facilitators at Lions said that she quite often has to explain to 10-year-olds how the solar system works. So that's just one of the graphics that we've used for that demonstration, so that we're going to actually animate it so that as the state of charge decreases, that bright looking battery on the left eventually becomes that rather flat looking battery on the right, so that the kids can quite visually see what condition the batteries are in.
Okay, great. I hope that answered your question, Peter. If not, we can go into more detail in the Q&A doc. Also, Chris has been answering some of these as they've come through, which is great. Thanks, Chris. But just a question around what has become of the diesel generators?
So they originally had 3. We removed one and we actually sold it off because clearly we didn't even have enough duty cycle left for 2 generators, much less 3. And the space that made is the space that I took up with the inverters. I just recently did some analysis because due to COVID, they've been closed for at least 6 weeks. In a previous closure in 2016, they were burning 1,400 litres a week of diesel, even though they had nobody at site because all the fridges and everything has to still operate. Whereas at the moment, they're burning no diesel at all. So they're very happy with the system.
Yeah, wow, that's amazing. A question too on if wind turbines were considered for the site.
Yeah, wind turbines definitely were considered. In fact, we may even, I've just recently purchased another anemometer with a logger so we can measure the actual wind. and I'm going to propose to them we'll eventually do that. On the Bureau of Meteorology wind mapping, it's not really a viable site, but sometimes local conditions, local terrain can change that. So although the Bureau of Meteorology might rule out your location, when you measure the wind, you might actually get a viable wind. Having some windy days doesn't mean that you can support a wind turbine. You need nice, consistent wind.
Yep. Okay, great. Complicated. Thank you. We might have some more questions at the end for you, Peter, but thank you for that.
No problem.
We shall go on now to our third and final speaker, John Coulter. So John has been a member of the Energy Innovation Cooperative in Southern Gippsland since 2009. He has a background in energy efficiency and retrofitting for households and small businesses, and an interest in small wind turbines. He has a graduate certificate in sustainability from Swinburne University and has been involved in community energy feasibility assessments, energy audits, climate communities workshops, and is on the Bass Coast Climate Change Community Reference Group. His focus recently has been on the Old Energy, New Energy project at the State Coal Mine in Wonthaggi, which he will cover now. Thanks, John. Over to you. So just take yourself off mute, John.
Okay, hopefully I'm unmuted.
That's great.
Now. Okay, okay.
Go ahead, thank you.
Okay, sorry about that, folks. Afternoon, everybody. I just want to give a very brief history of the co-op, then talk about the major project we did, the Old Energy, New Energy project, and then briefly talk about a couple of the other smaller community projects that we've done through our core fund. So the co-op began in 2009. With some of the aims you can see up on the screen there. It's effectively played the role of a community power hub, mostly through voluntary efforts from the board and members, and has always done it on a shoestring budget. We're a non-trading cooperative with over 300 shareholder members, volunteer board of directors, and a part-time manager, which is me up in the corner of your screen at the moment. From 2010 to 2013, the co-op delivered the Southern Solar Hub project. This was a solar bulk buy that installed 650 kilowatt of rooftop solar. We've produced regular newsletters, ran climate communities workshops and information sessions on improving energy efficiency. These were run at local energy efficient homes or retrofitted houses, and the total attendance at those was over 2,500 people. Co-ops also facilitated over 130 community information and education activities with over 4,000 people attending to learn about energy efficiency, renewable energy, and emissions reduction. The co-op's also facilitating the place-based clean energy solutions with communities. This has started with the Totally Renewable Phillip Island, or TRIPI as they're known, with some seed funding from the ETU and Bass Coast Council. This draft vision you can see on the screen was developed in 2018. This has led to some further funding from the Bass Coast Council to bring community, business and government together to co-design a vision and model that could then be used by other communities. And the co-op has recently successfully applied for some funding from the Latrobe Valley Authority for a pre-feasibility study for Phillip Island, which is underway at the moment. This will help map out a pathway for renewable communities in South Gippsland, along with the Renewable Energy Roadmap, which I believe is going to be released shortly. So that's a brief summary of the co-op activities over the last 11 years. It also demonstrates how targeted small grants to local groups can lead to much larger impact as well. And the third point on the screen is also really important for the co-op. It's about using local contractors local groups and services wherever we can, which leads me on to the Southern Core Fund. This is one of our major ongoing initiatives. I won't go into too much detail about the finance and loan agreements, as I think that's going to be part 4 of the webinar series. But I will mention one of the funding mechanisms we used and then show you some of the local projects that came out of that. Back in 2016, the board of the co-op thought that if Scott Morrison could take a lump of coal into Parliament and spruik the benefits, then we thought maybe we could put solar panels on a coal mine. And we just happened to have a historic coal mine in Wonthaggi. Even better, we thought, if we can get a grant to pay for the solar panels, then we could sell the power to Parks Victoria, who manage the site, and then use the income from that to go into this community fund for the benefit of other local community groups. Old energy, new energy. Who could resist a project with a name like that? State government couldn't, and we received a grant through the New Energy Jobs Fund. We also had some seed funding from the Bass Coast Community Foundation, which was really important in those early stages. The grant was to install 91 kilowatt of solar panels and 41 kilowatt hours of storage batteries. Fortunately, the prices had gone down from when we first got our grant to when we installed, so we were able to get increase the system size. We had to negotiate a lease and behind-the-meter power purchase agreement with Parks Victoria. This took quite some time, and PPAs were more unknown back in 2016, and it's how things have changed and how exciting it is. We all know what PPAs are now, almost. We required lots of permits, planning, heritage, amended grazing licences, retailer exemptions from the Essential Services Commission. But in the end, it all paid off and will continue to pay off by providing income for the core fund for the term of the lease we have with Parks Victoria. Southern Core Fund's got deductible gift recipient status, so all donations are tax deductible. Luckily, we received some early donations, which meant that we could start funding community projects earlier than we'd originally expected. We've raised over $90,000, which is being used to fund interest loans to local groups to either make energy efficiency changes or install renewable energy. This helps the group save on electricity, reduce emissions, and keeps that money in the community. This first project was in 2017. This was at the Foster Pool, outdoor non-heated pool. That's quite chilly, even in summer. And alone on the right-hand side, that black shaded area is covered in small black tube. So it was solar heating they put in there, which has made a big difference to the temperature. This was a 3-year no-interest loan, which will be paid off completely next month. So those funds are already being reused to fund other community group projects. Granville Rec Reserve was another project. This was a bit different. This was a local community group, played a big role in the bushfires last year, feeding the CFA and Parks Vic Rangers. They wanted to put in some solar panels to cut their electricity bill. But after we did the feasibility assessment, a lot of the usage was in the evening, so it wasn't such a good prospect financially for a loan. Instead, the co-op applied for an auspiced Bass Coast Community Grant, which was successful, and the rest of the funding came from a DELP project and a small donation from the Core Fund for monitoring. So this community group didn't have any repayments to make, and they'll get some advantage from the feed-in tariff as well. Again, this project was different. Phillip Island Early Learning Centre. This started as a Pick My Project grant application, which was auspiced by the co-op as part of the Totally Renewable Phillip Island initiative. The capital cost was covered by the grant with in-kind admin and project management from the co-op. And again, this provides work for local installers. The money stays in the local community. And because this is a behind-the-meter arrangement, there's an extra advantage there because the power that they export doesn't go out to the grid for a feed-in tariff. It goes to Cowes Primary School. So there's an extra benefit there by having that behind-the-meter model. This project also includes a display monitor in the foyer and educational activities for the children, so they can teach their parents about renewable energy, and hopefully there'll be some upcoming renewable energy advocates in this photo. In 2019, we've provided a $15,000 loan to the Bass Rec Reserve. This was to replace their roof so that they could then install the solar panels. So it's a bit of a mixture with the projects as to what the actual money goes for. We mentioned before, this is our most recent project. This was an $11,000 loan to the Artist Resource Collective, which is a fantastic place if you haven't been there. This is also to install some solar panels. Southern Core Fund, we've currently got about 6 or 7 other projects in the pipeline that we're considering as word gets out more. None of them are up on the screen here because all our projects are in Gippsland, but unfortunately we don't have enough funds for them all, so we're trying to raise more money for the Core Fund either via grants or donations, which can be made via the website or through a co-op board member or myself. The donations are tax deductible, end of financial year is approaching. And again, the money gets used again and again in the community and stays local. We're also hoping there might be some post-COVID economic recovery funds directed to renewables for community groups and small businesses that we might be able to access as well to help some of the local groups. So to finish up, the one last request is that the co-op's also looking for help in some areas, like many community groups, for website, social media, publicity videos like those great ones we saw earlier, fundraising, writing grant applications. If you think you can help, please get in touch. And that's enough for me, and back to you, Heidi.
Thanks for that, John. That was really, really great to hear about all of those projects. There's so many of them and more to come by the sounds of it. If you've got questions for John, please type them in now. And I've got one, John. How do people access the Southern Core Fund if they're interested in a loan? Is there criteria or a process to follow, or they just get in touch? How does that work?
Get in touch initially with the co-op. We have a one-page form, like a pre-feasibility form that we get people to fill out just to give us a bit of information about the group, what they're looking for, things like that. That goes to the co-op, and we have a public fund management committee as well to help assess projects. But it's very easy initially, and then we'll usually look at the interval, obtain the interval data for the site. And one of our first steps in the process is doing an energy audit as well of the sites, which the interval data is very useful for. And then that can lead on to a larger scale feasibility assessment like we've done at the Traralgon Neighbourhood House, which is we're working with at the moment. And then it's a matter of just looking at where the power is used and what sort of options there are. Whether sometimes it can be a mix of grants or a mix of loans, and then it comes back to the co-op based on how much money there is in the fund, basically.
Yeah, great. And the energy audits that you undertake, is the loan able to cover the cost of those as well, and that feasibility work?
In most cases, yes, it does, or it has for all of the cases so far. And sometimes we can pick up little bits of seed grants and other funding as well for the purpose of the audits too. So yeah, it's not normally an out-of-pocket cost to the community group.
Great, thank you. Another question here, will the fund grow as time goes by? So for example, the low interest rates covers the cost of management, but still grows in size.
That's an interesting question. That's one that, look, we're still working through as well, but the eventual aim is just to have a small administrative cost on the loans as they go through, because they're no interest. The fund doesn't build in size apart from donations or other sources of income, and you have to be able to sustain that. But yeah, it's still a work in progress, I guess, as we build the fund, is to just make sure that can be sustainable as the funds come in and go back out again.
Great, excellent. Thanks, John. I'll invite Peter and Chris to come back on the screen now as well, and we'll open it up to questions for all of you. So if you've got questions for anybody, if you could just type their name in the Q&A box and then your question, and I can direct it to the person you're hoping to answer it. One question that has come up that is probably most relevant for you, John, is some advice around setting up a cooperative. This has come from somebody working with a community group in New South Wales. Any advice from you on that, John?
I think working out whether you need to start with, I think, because there is quite a bit of administrative work in setting up associations or cooperatives. So sometimes it can be, it's whether you need to go make that step or whether you could be set up a group and be auspiced by, if there's another local group, sometimes that's a different way of doing it, which removes that administrative burden. And it sort of depends on the scale, I guess. So I'd look around if there's local, sometimes it could be conservation societies or other renewable groups nearby. Approach them and see whether if your aims are similar, then they may well be prepared to do an MOU and come to some sort of arrangement so that you don't need to do that yourself.
Great, thank you. And any advice on whether to go for a trading rather than distributing co-op?
Yes, I can't remember the detail on this. I think if it's a non-trading cooperative, sometimes it can affect the grant applications. With certain grants won't give money to trading cooperatives if there's any return that can go back to the shareholders in the cooperative. So that's why we're a non-trading one. I think the co-op, from memory, actually shifted from being trading to non-trading for that reason. Okay,
great. Thanks, John. And are you happy to follow up with, more information? We've got your contact details at the end, so perhaps you can have a conversation with this group to advise. Would that be okay?
Sure. Very, very happy to help any other groups in this area. Yeah.
Excellent. Thank you. Chris, question for you. There's been a couple of questions around the geographic reach of the Latrobe Valley Community Power Hub and how people can access your advice.
Yeah, very simply, initially we were set up around the 3 shires of Baw Baw, Latrobe and Wellington. However, as we are auspiced now under the Gippsland Climate Change Network, we are basically taking the viewpoint that we service Gippsland. So if you are in Gippsland, we're here to help.
Great, and we'll have your contact details at the end as well.
And yes, Hamish is busy putting up notes there, and I would like to recommend people do jump on and have a look at the Helen Haynes document. Very good. And the upcoming chats are on Friday, if I remember rightly.
Okay, the consultation chats.
Yep.
Yep, so perhaps we can send around the details of that in follow-up as well. Thanks, Chris. Question for you, Peter. So how big a township could theoretically be powered by using the system at Lacola?
A 120 volt storage system can now easily do a 240 kilowatt supply load. So Lacola's only 60 kilowatts, so we clearly go 4 times bigger than that. I reckon around about 60 to 80 houses we could handle quite readily. If we go bigger than that, we then move into a different storage. So we move into much larger, higher voltage batteries, but we could still do it. There's possibly no upper limit.
Okay, wow, amazing. All right, well, keep your questions coming in for a few minutes. I'll go to the last slide here, and any that we haven't been able to answer today will get answered by our presenters and then put into a document for the website. So if all of our presenters could turn off your videos now, and I'll just go to our last screen here. So, thank you so much to all of our presenters for today and for everybody that has joined us. Really hope that you've got something out of it. So yeah, as I mentioned, any questions that haven't been covered will be and be uploaded onto the website, and the web address is there up on the screen for you. So those should go up tomorrow along with the recording of this webinar. So I encourage you to register for the upcoming webinars in this series. So the next one you can see there is on the 3rd of June on township models of community energy, and you can register for that through that link there too on the website. So thank you so much again to all of our speakers and to everybody that's joined, and I hope you have a wonderful day. Thank you.